Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Brian. We're going to kick off a brand new theme this week, melodic bass lines. Those songs that feature maybe predominantly, maybe just in a specific section, a bass line that is melodic. It's not just laying down a foundation or doing pedal tones for the chord progression. It's playing a melody. We just don't get to hear that too often, and it's one of my favorite things in rock and metal music, so we're going to dedicate a whole week to it. Kicking it off, we're checking out Metallica's Orion, which, I mean, I think there's very few people who would call themselves Metallica fans who aren't at least aware of this track. So I am aware of it. I know that this is Cliff on bass here, and I know there's a pretty cool bass idea in here. I think there's a bass solo in here too. But I went and looked at the Master of Puppets album list, and I know the first four tracks, but I don't think I've ever heard the last four, and Orion is part of that group. So I suppose there is a chance I end up listening to this track and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is that one. Because I have listened to a lot of Metallica deep cuts, thanks to my father, but at the same time, I haven't listened to any Metallica album all the way through, except for Saint Anger, which I have heard way too many times all the way through, because, hot take, that's probably my favorite Metallica album. So with all that said, let's dive into Orion. Might be a first time listen, might just be a first time listen in quite some time. See what's going on with this, see what Metallica is bringing to the table today. Is that swirly sound in the background, the bass? Even by Metallica standards, this is very long for an intro. Metallica did a lot of that back then, shifting the accents against the backbeat. Yeah, it's a very funky idea. Not like funk music, just rhythmically interesting. It's a little odd. Yeah, very tasteful solo there. A little bit of flourishy parts, but great pacing through it, great storytelling. Each idea led to the next naturally. Yeah, very bluesy. Very legato style on the note changes for the guitars. Yeah. I love the way the bass line goes along with the melody on the guitars, but kind of doing its own thing with those runs. Keeping the same key notes from the last set. It's gonna speed up. Oh, actually not where I thought they were going with that. I mean, it did get faster, but I was expecting them to go thrashier. So really interesting drum pattern for this section. That's kind of where I was expecting it to come back up to. Oh wait, this is the intro. Interesting track. Something like this, it's rather interesting to me, especially being in my position. I analyze music, and I think a lot of people expect me to have insight on most everything that I listen to on the channel. And I mean, yeah, typically I do. I think that's a really good expectation to have because it's what I typically deliver on. But I find it really difficult to dig deep into Metallica. For instance, let me just go through my thought process here on this track. So we have the fade in, and I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. We have this swirly, swirly thing going on in the background. Nowadays, I'd say, oh, that's some synth work. But back then, with Metallica, probably not. I don't think Metallica's ever put synth in their music before. So actually, I kind of want that now. Like, I know the Metallica fans are really hyped for their return to form with Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Destruction, both returning back to some of those thrashier roots that we saw with whatever album came before Master Puppets. I can't think of that right now. And of course, bringing back the sounds of songs like Battery off of Master Puppets. But as I mentioned earlier, probably my favorite album is Saint Anger. I'm not going to say it's their best album. I think that requires more of an objective lens, and I'm not a big fan of ranking art. I think art exists beyond whether you enjoyed it or not. But I do think Saint Anger is one of their more interesting albums. I wish they would experiment more. I would love to hear Metallica take on some a modern metalcore sound. See what they make with that. Because the thing is, if Metallica made metalcore, the modern metalcore sound, you go listen to anything, any band making metalcore right now, they all have a very similar style to them, especially the mainstream groups doing it. If Metallica made it, it'd be different than that. It would still, be like 70%. It'd be their attempt at it, but they would still have their own spin on it. What would that sound like? What happens if they put some synth into their music? I don't know. These are the questions I want answered. They took their stab at heavier, sludgier, new metal stuff on Saint Anger. Was it all perfect? No. Was it interesting? Yes. I want to hear interesting Metallica. And so when I come to Orion, though, I don't know how we got on that. I'm listening. Oh yeah, the bass at the beginning, doing the swirly whirly stuff. That was interesting. I'm like, okay, I've never heard Metallica do this before. But as soon as we get into the riffage, the first thing I think is, oh, okay, yeah, this is a pretty typical Metallica riff. Obviously, it has their timbre, their guitar tone. It has the Metallica signature sound to it. But the riffs are also very Metallica. Lots of pedal tone, very little movement above it. Bump, 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 bump. There's like this little melody. If you get rid of all the pedal tone stuff, you get this little bit of movement up here. Very Metallica style of thing to do. The note intervals that they utilize in this quasi melody, also very Metallica. A lot of signature ideas are in here. Now, at the time, I don't know that you could say that. Coming off of, it was Ride the Lightning, right? That was the one before this. This is a very different sound of an album. Aside from Battery, there's not a lot of super thrashy ideas in here. Especially when you get to stuff like Thing That Should Not Be. Is that what it is? Yeah, The Thing That Should Not Be. Sanitarium. Even Master of Puppets takes things down a notch. So Battery's the only one that's that really driving classic thrash sound. So when we get to Orion here, yeah, to me this is just classic Metallica sound, but was it classic at the time? Probably not. This album would have been very formative for them and would have been experimental and new for many of the fans, I think. Actually, probably just as much as Ride the Lightning was for fans of Kill 'Em All, because that was a drastic shift as well. Metallica made a lot of big changes in their first couple of years, which I guess makes sense looking past this into Black and Load and Reload and Saint Anger. Metallica never really had a sound. So I think it's wild now that they have a sound. Something very distinctly Metallica because they were constantly reinventing themselves. I never thought about that. Anyways, I keep getting off topic here. We get to most of this though, and it all just sounds distinctly this era of Metallica for me. It's difficult to, I think, emotionally engage with any of this. We get to some of the guitar solos or just lead melodies. I don't know how you'd want to classify them. They sort of blur together those two definitions of melody writing in this track, given that we don't have a solo section. But yeah, I mean, once again, it's the kind of soloing I expect from Metallica, especially Kirk, the more melodic, bluesier ideas coming through on this. Really great flow and pacing to it all. It's difficult for me to listen to this and not immediately think, yeah, this is just Metallica's tried and true writing. And so it makes it difficult for me to be objective and analytical about it because I kind of divorce a lot of it from the that feeling of listening to it to sort of categorizing it. And it's not something I do intentionally. I noticed this deep into the song. It was like 5, 6 minutes in. I was like, dang, I don't know how to feel about this. I don't know how to reflect on it. Why? And that's when I started interrogating. I was like, oh, because I'm just interpreting it as another Metallica track. And that's not great, especially for my position here as an analyzer. But it is how I ended up engaging with this, which kind of sucks. But I think it's one of those things. I've brought this up before too, especially when it comes to post-hardcore. When I listen to bands that are emulating some of the biggest post-hardcore sounds and kind of creating that mainstream pop-style post-hardcore part of the genre that kind of took off in the 2000s, it's difficult for me to be critical about it. I'm too close to it. It's a sound that I'm very familiar with, and it's not one I guess that I engage with too emotionally. It's some sort of reduction of effectiveness due to familiarity. I don't know if there's some sort of psychological thing for that, but if you watch a sad section of a movie the first time, it's gonna get you. You're bawling. You're just really engaging with the characters and empathizing with them. But then the second time, it just doesn't quite hit as hard. And by the 10th time you've seen the scene, you're not even crying anymore. You know it's sad. You feel it's sad, but it just doesn't have the right impact. You've built up a resistance to it. And I kind of think there is something analogous to that going on when it comes to music like this that I'm close to. I just have a difficult time engaging with it in the same way that I do with completely fresh sounds. With that said, I do have a couple of things that I want to talk about right here. The overall phrasing of this song is interesting. The structure of it basically goes A, B, A, which isn't that interesting in and of itself, but the transitions between ideas, they're kind of all over the place. Some of the ideas are very smooth transitions. Some of them are these beautiful callbacks, but recontextualized with new ideas around them or removing concepts. Like eventually we heard the intro guitar riff without the swirling bass line under it. The bass took on a new idea that complemented that section rather than created an atmosphere to it. That was a really nice transition, and it took like this little 4-bar turnaround that seemed like it was going somewhere new and then ended up reversing and going back to that initial A section. That was awesome. The move into the slower section was fine. Coming off of that really cool turnaround at the beginning, I was kind of hoping for better transitions throughout. We never quite hit them. And then the final transition to get back into the A section, although we did have a little bridge that come right before that with the alternating bass, tom, and snare. The unka, 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 ka, unka, unka, unka. That was just a wild drum pattern, not only for Metallica, but for that section in general. I don't really think it flowed with what the guitars were doing, and it was just kind of weird. But it's Metallica being interesting. I've never heard them do anything like that, and for that alone, I'm really appreciative of it. Um, and then, of course, that was kind of strange, and it took us into back to our A section. We got the intro riff all over again. But right before that, we had a classic. See, here's the thing again. I'm not analyzing this as a song. This is just another classic Metallica idea. But no, they slowed the song down and they get a chord and then another chord and then another chord and the song just like drags to a halt. And that's when I said something along the lines, "Oh, they're going to pick things up again. We're going to go faster now." This is just a classic idea of Metallica. This is one of their transitions. They slow the song down to a crawl, technically put a fermata in there, just allow this moment to hang, and then jump into something more energetic. I've heard this in many of their songs, usually going into some sort of thrashy solo. And instead, we get definitely something a bit faster, but not not where I was thinking. We had this strange drum idea, and then that was the transition that took us back to our intro to fade the track out, which I thought was an interesting idea because we fade in on the same riff, I think, as we fade out on. The only difference is that the bass swirliness is what took us in at the beginning, that atmospheric sound. We didn't get that at the end. So the structure of the track and the way that they transition between ideas is kind of hit and miss for me. Some of them are expected, some are a bit more esoteric, at least for them, and others are just really well executed. You really get a little piece of all of Metallica's writing in here, good or bad. um, this is melodic bass leads week. Let's talk about that bass. The intro is interesting. It's not really a melodic line. Like I've mentioned, it's an atmospheric sound, but it's also something that is very cool. Now, I know that Cliff experimented with pedals in a way that most metal bassists didn't and kind of still don't. This is something I've talked about, I guess not too recently, but I have brought up on the channel before, is that guitarists have signature sounds. Bassists tend to just have a good bass tone, usually a nice, round, warm sound. You don't really mess with pedals and tones. You create signature timbres for your instrument. You just make a pretty standard bass sound and it fits in. And I've always thought that was a bit of a missed opportunity, and I think it's pretty cool that Cliff has been doing this for decades before all of this. Everything that happened after the 80s. You would think that this would have been one of the defining elements of Metallica. I mean, this came off of one of their biggest albums. Master of Puppets was them breaking into the mainstream, and it had a very unique bass tone on it with bass experimentation as far as the bass tone. And yet, as big as Metallica got, what they contributed to the metal world, aside from just the general thrashiness of everything and really long tracks, is having not much bass presence in their production. And metal suffered for this for a long time. I don't want to put all that weight on Metallica. It was a group effort. I think of the time a lot of bands were kind of drowning out the bass. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that stuck around, and I attribute it to Metallica's sound. This is a remastered version, and I wonder how prevalent the bass is on this track in the original. I couldn't find the original on Spotify, which I think is a missed opportunity. I don't want to get on a big rant here, but Apple certainly would have had would they? It's in the power of the artists, isn't it? But at least on Apple, sometimes there's a drop-down box where you can pick remasters, collector's editions, all sorts, and like listen to different versions of the album. Spotify just never has that. I've never seen it on any album, and that kind of sucks. Especially since I wanted to know how long this album was, but Spotify just says it's about 10 hours because it is the remastered deluxe box set, which has 10 discs on it. Several live recordings, behind the scenes recordings, riff diaries, all sorts of cool stuff. If you're a massive Metallica fan, there's a lot of awesome things in here. Demos, in progress ideas, very cool stuff. Not anything I'm interested in, and there's no way to get just the 8 song. I'd add it up myself. Oh, I could have just went to rate your music. Man, all there was like 15 seconds I'm not getting back. Anyways, that rant's over. How present was the bass on the original? Um, man, oh yeah, bass tone. The bass tone on here is awesome. I love it. And the bass experimentation with the pedals at the beginning. That's where we got onto all this. Um, yeah, great ideas though. I really enjoy that type of experimentation of sound. I kind of attribute that in a way to the way that some of the earlier prog bands of the 70s, and even going back to the Beatles, and the way that they were experimenting with sound and technology. I mean, yeah, we hear guitarists do this type of experimentation all the time, trying to find their signature tones. We never hear the basses do, and I think it's awesome. We need to hear more of that. And it's a cool way to start this track off, too, because, again, I don't think anybody else is playing around with that. No one else is coming up with ideas like that. But of course, the real bass lead, because through the A section, the bassist is primarily giving us pedal tone work, um, is the slower B section. And we get this really nice melodic bass lick. Now, I don't know what I was expecting for the week. I don't remember what the description of the theme was when I presented it to my patrons. I was kind of hoping for melodic leads, and this was just a melodic lick or a melodic riff for the rock world. Um, and it was good. Don't get me wrong, but it was a short lick that we heard over and over and over, and it stopped being melodic to me at one point. It was still a melody, right? But it ends up becoming a lick, which becomes this foundational cycle. I think I just have to get my head around that, and that's probably what we're getting this week is a lot of melodic bass licks rather than just walking bass lines or uh, pedal tone stuff. And it is a good idea. I really liked it the first couple of times I heard it. It kind of faded into the background for me for a bit, and then the guitars came in and layered on top of that with a less involved idea. So when the guitars were holding out a note, we had these nice little movement ideas, three or four eighth notes from the bass that would lead to the next note that the guitars all came on as well. Just a beautiful way of intertwining a moving melodic bass idea within the guitar work and to create this synergized duality between the two of them. It is a beautiful moment in the middle of all of this. Greatly enjoyed that. Usually I wrap up tracks with my interpretation of it. What does it mean? How did I feel? What is my thoughts on the intention of the track? And like I said, I think I'm just too close to it. It's just a Metallica song to me. I don't hear a story. I don't feel it. It just sounds cool. And maybe that's what Metallica songs are supposed to be. Maybe they had an intention of a story with this one, being that it's an instrumental. I don't know. The melody writing on it is good. There's some really clean parts, there's some very safe parts. It's a very Metallica song, and I hate that that's how I describe it, but that's 100% how I understood it. Has some interesting ideas, some odd ideas, and some really slick bass work. I enjoyed my time with it, and since I've listened to 5 out of the 8 tracks, I might as well just listen to Disposable Heroes, Leper Messiah, and Damage Inc. one of these days and say that I finally heard all of Master of Puppets. Oh wait, you know what? I have heard all of the Black Album. We used to play that in the car when I was a kid, all the way through. It's been a long time since I heard most of that stuff, but I'm sure as soon as I listen to that album, it'll all click. But I think that and Saint Anger are the only two albums I've listened to all the way through. Alright, kind of a weird video. I feel like I talked more about listening experience, Metallica as a band, and bass tone as an idea more than I talked about this song, but I hope there was still some interesting conversation here and maybe an eye-opening element for someone watching. Even if it wasn't particularly an analysis of the song, maybe somebody still learned something here today. Those are my thoughts. Metallica's Orion off of Master of Puppets. What are your thoughts about this track? Was this the first time you heard this song as well? Was there anything I said that you agree with? Maybe you'd like to expand on? Maybe you'd like to correct me on if I stated something wrong? Also, maybe you just have thoughts, opinions, or perspectives on this track. Toss it all down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree, which takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for this one. We do have a special selection coming up next. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll continue on exploring more awesome melodic bass ideas. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.